How can we democratise real-world narrative experiences through novel technologies?
That's right, so democratisation. So by the end of year one, we'd have used scrap heap prototyping, which is grabbing stuff that already exists, and started working with groups of people. So drones, we thought, commercially available technology of other kinds, geocaching, game software, recording devices, and we would run events, maybe hackathons, storythons, where we get bunches of people together and we throw this technology together and they'd help us do that, and hence the democratisation. And then we'd have an outreach presentation programme, and then the output of this would be those events, and the impact would be the buzz. So we try to have inspired people in that sort of community by the end of the first year. By the end of year three, we'd have done some other stuff. We'd have produced some SDK, libraries, things like that, some novel hardware maybe. That would be the outputs of that thing. So we'd actually have something more formalised for doing it with by then, something new for doing it with. And the impact would be the beginning of services, of seeing it applied in some kind of business and leisure domains. Another output would be the guidelines, which would show you how to realise the potential, and these would be freely available, design and application guidelines, so that groups of people could do this for themselves, rather than having to have a company do it for them. By the end of year 10, if this took off, there would be companies that were using this kind of technology. They'd be companies who use narrative in their business, so there might be commercial products for people doing management training. There would be people advertising, we do this kind of real-world narrative with technology as part of, and using it to attract customers. That's what the USP bit means. And there'd be some personal kits, so you could do it on a small scale, round with family members one afternoon during the holidays, for instance, and have fun. And there'd be some education applications, and there'd be some entertainment, and there'd be mass-produced technology, or beginnings of mass-produced technology. Actually, 10 years isn't very long for that kind of thing, in fact. But that's if it took off and you got impact eventually, if the technology transferred, that's what would happen.
So we're now co-narrate.
Oh, that's good.
And what we're trying to do is to use technology to enable naive users to create narratives from their own data. And the use case that we're thinking of particularly is lobby groups, so marginalised groups. So our year one idea would be that one marginalised group would produce digital stories, not necessarily using new technology, but using the idea like Mark was telling us about earlier, and use that to lobby politicians and other groups for a change that they were looking to see. So that would be year one. 3 years later, year three, we would be establishing data standards, promoting openness of data, addressing privacy concerns to democratise data, so that people would routinely have access to data about themselves, data they've created. Nothing would be locked away, and also there would be standards and conversion tools so they could convert all this data they already have into a format suitable for creating digital stories. 10 years later, we would have a free star toolkit, open source, but a premium version available at cost, which would enable groups to create their own digital stories so easily that having digital stories would be an accepted and normal part of any kind of campaigning work. So their placards would have digital stories embedded within them. And that's us.
Oh, wow.
That's very good, isn't it?
We are looking at facilitating collaborations between artists and technologists. That kind of like go back to the kind of thing you were doing as well. But our focus is on getting people to actually work together and identifying ways of getting people together and work efficiently. So the first year we'll be looking at scoping the level of interaction and the spectrum of potential interactions through a cycle kind of approach where we can look at research, meet those research and get people to meet with each other, start to collaborate, and then try to regather to formulate some pilot projects. So we're talking about, for instance, really maybe not essentially working from specific technologies or specific disciplines, but actually more looking at potential for interactions rather than something very structured in that way. Year 2, 3, we'll be looking at having 3 pilots projects in which we get people to collaborate to see how it works. And year 10, we kind of struggle a little bit for a 10-year plan. I mean, Plus, because I mean, the whole idea of our project is that actually by the end of year one, you're going to start to get plenty of ideas of how you could go forward, which we can't maybe foresee because that's the idea of collaboration and synergies. You can't actually quite foresee what people are going to come up with. But we'll be looking within 10 years to establish some level of virtual research center of network and have our own call, like Innovate or EPSERC or that kind of things that would actually recognize art and technology collaboration.
Okay, so as you can see, we are typically the awkward group that refuse to respond to the imperialist mantra of how we would do our structuring. So we haven't got a 1, 3, and 10-year period here. In the end, there you go. So in a way, I kind of see this sometimes as a bit like, you know, prospecting, when you try to find a nice rich seam of stuff that you can dig at to get a grant proposal in some ways. That, you know, you go through the jungle and there's all these snakes and things like this, and then as everyone's doing the same stuff, how do you find somewhere different? And so we were talking about different areas we're involved with, which is technology in my case, heritage and drama, and about what we do and what we're interested in. So the domain was heritage, which you see is a good nuts and bolts sort of area for putting in grant proposals. Heritage is a good thing. I think everyone agrees. And the scope is a common scope which is being looked at, I think, quite, not exhaustively, but quite a lot, which is the idea of using narrative techniques and site-specific digitization to sort of try and increase the experience and engagement in heritage. And for me, what I thought was the interesting seam of stuff to, you know, get the pickaxe at and try and think about grant proposals was that in fact, nearly all that previous work has an incredibly British-centric view of narrative and drama. That when we talk, as I started my own talk with, you know, everyone thinks of the world in terms of stories. Of course, I meant in terms of British-style stories, in British-style films, in British-style literature, in British-style drama, right? When in fact, if you look at drama across the world, it's enormously variable what that assumptions in the story process is, what the narrative process is, and so forth. And therefore, I think it's really interesting to start to break out of that limitation of, oh, this is narrative, it's beginning, middle, and end story, and then look at these other types of narrative techniques that are available, and then go back again to this idea of trying to create experience with heritage, either augmenting spaces or using distributed magic lenses and all this other stuff, but with the prospect of using, say, site-specific postmodernist art as an inspiration and so forth. And that's as far as we got. So we didn't get to year one, did we?
C minus.
Still got my trowel out.
That's enough. Are there any questions for Breen?
No, but no, but it's interesting, and it's fine you didn't go 1, 3, 10, it was just to give people structure. So yes, a lot of ideas, some of them I think people could go on with. Almost everything that's been suggested, there are calls out there for similar things. If people can be bothered to write the bids, I think that's the, but that's the problem.